Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The National Labor Relations Board is operating without a quorum, and its case backlog is continuing to grow. Now, the Trump administration is proposing a smaller budget and fewer staff. Here to help us understand the details and the implications for employers and unions is Senior Counsel in the Labor and Employment Law Department at Proskauer, Josh Fox. Mr. Fox, thanks so much for joining me.
Terry, it's great to be here. Appreciate you having me on.
So we're going to talk about the National Labor Relations Board. This organization has been a little bit in the crosshairs of the Trump administration, given that they focus on labor relations and union operations. What are you seeing generally as signs in their 2026 budget submission?
Yeah, so the budget submission, I think, to understand it, the context of the board is important. So the board right now is sitting without a quorum, meaning there's not at least 3 members sitting on the board. So the board can't issue decisions in unfair labor practice cases, so charges against employers or against unions, and the board can't issue decisions in representation proceedings where there's issues that are being challenged and that could be appealed to the NLRB. And what I see in the proposed budget, so it's not final yet, obviously, is a proposed reduction. And, the reduction of $14 million, 4.7%, the principles of the administration appear to be efficiency, both through reduced headcount at the regions, the field workers, not layoffs, but voluntary retirement plans and things of that nature. And, a goal of enhancing the technology that the NLRB workers can utilize to make their operations more efficient, make things, go quicker. I think, so what I do is I'm a management side labor attorney, so deal with the NLRB and the regions often. And then what we're finding over the last couple of years is, cases take a long time to get resolved. And so, the hope would be that enhanced technological advancements could speed those things along.
You laid out a number of issues there that we can dig into sort of one at a time. Maybe the first one is the board does have a significant case backlog, as you've just articulated. So a 5% cut is not big necessarily, but it depends on where those cuts come from. They're talking about almost a 10% reduction in the workforce. What impact would that have on their ability to actually hear and resolve the cases?
Yeah, one would think that would make it more challenging for, the existing staff that remain to process those cases. It'll be interesting to see what the numbers bear out in terms of any increase in case filings over the last year. Those numbers will come out later this year. I know a couple of years ago when, the board's budget had been kind of static for a long period of time, from 2014 to 2022 in the $274 million range. That the increase happened for FY23 of about $25 million. And that was due to, a real surge in union petitions and cases that were filed with the board, obviously during a different presidential administration to help, respond to those needs. And so, and then over the last couple of years, the board has asked for more money, including under the Biden administration, and they didn't get it. And so here, with the reduction, I think that maybe the expectation is kind of do more with less, but what it seems from their justification is, increases to, the information technology resources that they have to help make things more efficient, even with fewer bodies.
I'm speaking with Josh Fox. He's a senior counsel in the Labor and Employment Law Department at Proskauer. So you mentioned the IT investment. They do have a $23 million fund from the Technology Modernization Fund to address their case management system. And it looks like there's an approach here that's very consistent to other agencies that we're seeing from the Trump administration, which is AI is going to solve all of these sorts of problems. When you dig into the details, what do you see there?
Yeah, look, AI has been touted to solve all of the world's problems in many different areas. It remains to be seen what the ultimate impact of that is. So, I think, increased investment there as they put it in their justification, to automate routine tasks, enhance data analysis, improve case processing efficiency, from as simple as, when a representation petition is filed, and especially for big bargaining units, there's voter lists that are filed and information of those voters that are filed. If there are ways for the board to be able to automate that process in a secure way to ensure the protection of any personal information that's included there, I would suspect that would be a welcome addition for those folks who do work at the board. And utilizing AI to automate routine tasks, again, like that's a goal for every organization. Whether that works, whether it works well, whether it actually enhances efficiencies in an accurate way, I think everyone's watching kind of with bated breath, both labor lawyers for the NLRB and just generally.
There's a line in here that's not, as I read it, necessarily resource related, but does raise a flag, which is that this budget proposal maintains restrictions on the use of electronic voting in representation elections. How does that play out in day-to-day practice? What does that mean?
Yeah, so, I think there's been different trends in voting in NLRB elections from COVID, where, people couldn't come in and vote in person. The traditional model was voting in person. And so, during the pandemic, by necessity, there was a push for mail voting and not in person. And as we've clawed our way out of the pandemic, there's been that kind of pushback to require in-person voting. Whether it could proceed to an electronic voting process, whether that's even possible, whether that could be secure, that's up for debate. But I think it kind of goes to that, that tension, right, between if employees want a union to represent them or want to vote a union out in a decertification election, there's a push to have those employees come and show up and vote, like we do in, political elections, rather than either, vote by mail, which takes time and is apt for potential interference or other issues that could come about. And, electronic voting goes a step further, where people could question the process and it's much, some would argue on one side that, hey, it's easier for people to vote in an electronic way, but there are certainly, questions and cause for concern about that for something so important, as whether a union is going to represent you in your workplace.
So as you read the tea leaves from this budget submission and the other sorts of events in the surrounding environment for NLRB, what do you see as the future of its role in the labor relations marketplace?
Yeah, look, for employers with unions and employers even who don't have a unionized workforce and their employees, can unionize, for private sector employers, the NLRB and the National Labor Relations Act is a really important legislative scheme and agency that you have to, be aware of and understand the processes. We're in a unique time where there are, a number of existential challenges that the board is facing, through litigation challenges to the constitutionality of certain aspects of its scheme, to the board sitting right now without a quorum, and then this proposed budget that seeks to reduce the workforce. So it's an interesting transitional time, and I'm advising my clients, every day on the issues that they face in terms of how to navigate these times. At least for the time being, the federal labor law and the agency is not going anywhere, but we just have to monitor closely as things progress and to see, does this budget get approved? Does it get approved in this proposal, right? Like in the last few years, when it was the other way, where the board was requesting more money, it was kind of pared down. So it may be even pared down further. And what's the impact of that on, day-to-day labor relations in terms of the processing of cases?
That's a great perspective. I've been speaking with Josh Fox. He's a senior counsel in the Labor Employment Law Department at Proskauer. Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.